Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, private members' business. Second reading of Bill C-223, National Framework for a Guaranteed Livable Basic Income Act. In the name of Ms. Gazan.
Ms. Gazan, seconded by Mr. Green, moves that Bill C-223, an act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable basic income, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Development and the Status of Persons with Disability. Debate. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I rise today to urge my colleagues to support Bill C-223, an act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable basic income. This bill, in fact, addresses many of the critical issues that we're facing today. And I hope my colleagues will join the NDP in voting in favor of this bill and moving it to consideration at committee. And before I go on, Madam Speaker, I'd like to remind all of my colleagues in the House, across party lines, every single party has committed to implementing all 231 calls for justice of the National Inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. One of the most key key calls to justice that is being advocated for to end the ongoing genocide against Indigenous women and girls is Call to Justice 4.5 to put in place a guaranteed income for Indigenous peoples and all other Canadians. My bill is just merely heeding that call, particularly in support of ending gender-based violence for all people, including Indigenous women. And this bill is essential, Madam Speaker, because we know that Canada's current social safety net has become totally inadequate. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Guaranteed income supplement for seniors. An income guarantee, not livable. Disability benefits, as we hear disability advocates lobby government across the country with this new disability benefit, once again, not being provided what is required to live in dignity. We have income guarantees in this country. My bill is actually not offering up a new idea. What my bill is doing, however, Madam Speaker, along with thousands and thousands, over 100,000 advocates across the country, is urging elected officials to ensure that everybody in Canada has what they need to live in dignity. And that's not happening, Madam Speaker. According to a recent study by Statistics Canada, 1 in 10 people live in poverty in Canada as of last year. 1 in 10. And we've also seen a disturbing rise in child poverty in recent years. Some of the poorest children in this country in an urban centre live in my riding of Winnipeg Centre. The poorest. And even though we've been talking about how to lift up people in Canada, nobody is putting something on the table that actually achieves it beyond cheap political sound bites. Ed Broadbent, in 1989, Madam Speaker, passed a motion to end child poverty by the year 2000. But here we are, Madam Speaker. Here we are taking piecemeal approaches to deal with poverty, poverty that contributes directly to a gender-based violence crisis that has been noted in some urban centers as an epidemic. And we talk about families struggling to buy food, yet since 1989 and Ed Broadbent calling for the eradication of poverty in the year 2000, now in 2024, growing equality is increasing as we see growing disparity between the ultra-rich and those that are just barely making ends meet, if they actually are. We are actually, Madam Speaker, seeing a rise in the first time people become unhoused, families rolling onto the streets. Why? Not because we don't have a solution that has been studied, as I will speak to, but because members of Parliament have not joined in unity and political will to uphold human rights in this country, to uphold our Canadian Charter, and ensure that nobody has to live in poverty. Poverty, something that I have called one of the most violent human rights violations. And we want to talk about a mental health crisis? We want to talk about a mental health crisis in this country? We have one. And I can tell you, when you don't provide people with their basic human rights, housing, as my colleague from Nunavut brought up today, access to clean drinking water, food security, the ability to know that the next day that you will be able to survive, that is bad for your mental health. And what is it guised in this House? As I hear lately, this visceral, cruel rhetoric around people struggling, particularly those with addictions, poor bashing people that are already down, instead of talking about comprehensive solutions to lift people up. And it's for these reasons, Madam Speaker. It's for things that I see every day on the streets of Winnipeg Centre and around the country. The wonderful people that surround me, human beings living in encampments that are my constituents, whom I visit and have relationships and respect. This is the reason I put forward this bill, because if we are going to complain about people living in encampments, if we are going to complain about people living with, struggling with mental health, if we are going to talk about issues around ending gender-based violence, I don't want to hear about it in this place anymore unless people are willing to do what they need to do to make sure that people can live in dignity. And in cases of violence, should they choose to leave, that they actually have the financial resources to do so, and should they choose to be able to have a guaranteed livable basic income in addition to other programs and supports meant to meet specific and special needs, as my bill stipulates, like affordable housing with rent geared to income, like extra benefits for persons with disabilities so that they have what they need to pay for extra costs, medication, things to help them physically should they need, in addition to. So I'm offering us an opportunity, Madam Speaker, to do the right thing. I'm offering us an opportunity to do the right thing and lift people out of poverty, including the number of children in care in my riding that age out of care and at age 18 get dropped off at the Salvation Army without income, without housing. And we wonder why things are the way they are today. And then I have to listen to the Conservatives, even though, as a teacher, I know that families and children have been struggling with hunger longer than the last 10 years. I know that families have had housing insecurity longer than the last 10 years, made worse by conservative and liberal governments who failed to invest in affordable social housing with rent geared to income and failed to provide people with income guarantees that allowed them to live in dignity. But we can do better, Madam Speaker. And that's why I put forward this bill, which would be provided for anybody over the age of 18 or over the age of 17, students, refugee claimants, temporary foreign migrant workers, kids that would age out of care into income security and housing, seniors in my riding that are currently on the verge of being houseless, would provide them what they need, especially women, many seniors who worked in the unpaid care economy, who don't have pensions, who can't live off what they get from guaranteed income supplement. Is this how we want, Madam Speaker, seniors to live in this country? Is this how we want, Madam Speaker, children to live in this country? Is this how we want the disability community to live in this country because we turn a blind eye to human rights violations, turn a blind eye to gender-based violence, turn a blind eye to ageism, targeting primarily women? And we don't have to. So a lot of people ask, well, this is going to cost a lot of money. Why would you implement a guaranteed livable basic income? We have inflation right now. It's out of control. But let's talk about the high costs of poverty. And I want to talk about specifically the Dauphin study in Manitoba that an NDP government put forward in the 1980s. And what they found was folks that participated in the program had higher rates of graduation, mental health improved, and in fact, although there's a lot of myths that have not been proven in research ever, that people stopped working, what they found was that they saved in healthcare costs. What they found was that they saved in costs by not providing what they need to support good mental health, which includes ensuring that people have what they need in dignity. So research in terms of a lot of myths around guaranteed income don't add up. In fact, the Government of Ontario in 2017 launched a basic income pilot that provided 4,000 low-income people with cash transfers to help with their cost of living. Observers found that work placements and community involvement actually increased, not decreased. School retention improved. Health outcomes, especially mental health, were more positive, as reported by program recipients, affirming the findings from the study in Dauphin in the 1980s. And it is not like Canada would be the first. In fact, there's countries around the world that have implemented a guaranteed livable basic income where people feel the happiest and in fact have growing economies. So I don't want to hear in this House about costs of living. I'm tired of hearing poor bashing and bashing people with addictions in the most grotesque, pathologizing, stereotyping terms. I'm so tired of governments talking about lifting people up when we have something before us that is a good economic policy and in fact is a cost saver. If we do not have the political will, Madam Speaker, to implement a guaranteed livable basic income, I question our commitments as parliamentarians to eradicate poverty in this country. I question our commitment as parliamentarians to do what every single pretty much, and I say pretty much because I haven't talked to every single one, but every single women's organizations that deals with violence has stated very clearly, we need a guaranteed livable basic income now. It is through that, Madam Speaker, it is through respecting our charter, it is through respecting human rights that we will build a better country for all. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The member might be aware, I'm not too sure, but I was actually elected to the Manitoba Legislature back in 1988 and had the opportunity to experience both provincial and Conservative governments and provincial NDP governments, and was very much aware of the fact that this experiment that had taken place in Dauphin, yet many were surprised that neither administration, whether it's NDP for, 20 plus years or Conservatives for 15 plus years, have actually taken the initiative any further or had that discussion or debate, at least while I was there, in any real way that led to a resolution or a recommendation coming to Ottawa. I wonder if she could maybe expand upon what she believes the Manitoba's actual position is with respect to that, because I was never really clear on that.
The Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, but I'd like to correct the record because it's not factual. The fact is that the NDP government was in power. It got taken over by the Conservative Party at the time and they cancelled the program. So it's not that the Manitoba government at the time didn't want it to go forward. Unfortunately, it was stopped by a Conservative government. And I'd like to remind the Speaker, it is an NDP member with the support of the federal NDP caucus that has actually been pushing this forward, including my bill for a guaranteed livable basic income. Right. So I think it's a little rich to say we're not moving on it when I'm standing today with support of my whole caucus that's supporting a guaranteed livable basic income. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you very much, and I have much respect for the member from Winnipeg Centre. My question is this. So currently in place, there are a number of places in the Income Tax Act where individuals who earn less than $30,000 pay more than 50% in income tax and clawbacks. Would the member agree with me that we should reduce those clawbacks to enable people to keep more of their paychecks?
For Winnipeg Centre.
So I'd like to frame it a little bit. I certainly agree that the ultra-rich are not paying their fair share in this country. And I would point to things like, tax havens and tax loopholes for the ultra-rich. In saying that, I think we often forget about those who don't work as well in this discussion. And I'm going to take the opportunity, because I only have a couple of minutes. People with complex mental health and addiction issues might be able to work 2 days a week, not 5. There's many people who can't work. The problem, and why we see so much growing inequality in this country, is we place a person's value and human rights, it's contained about whether they are able to work or not. Now we have seniors, are we going to say, Grandma, get back to work? Sorry, you're suffering with mental health. Get back to work. You have to work 5 days a week, and if you don't, you're going to end up on the streets. Do I think we need to adjust our tax system so that those making less pay less taxes? Absolutely. I hope that the Conservatives eventually support that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires? The for Hamilton Centre, a brief question.
Very much, Madam Speaker. And one of the critiques that often will come is that programs like this, sometimes they'll say, is a Conservative ruse to actually take away social programs on the back end. And I do know that the Conservative member did reference clawbacks, and oftentimes it's provincial Conservative premiers who claw back on good social assistance programs. So could the honourable member, perhaps from Winnipeg Centre, and I thank her for her work, just take away any myths and just dispel any myths about how this bill would harm social programs and what safeguards we can have to ensure that greedy premiers don't claw it back in order to have tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy.
Honourable member for Winnipeg Centre, a brief answer, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. Absolutely not. This bill is very clear that a guaranteed livable basic income would be in addition to other supports and services meant to meet specific and special needs. And that would include things like extra supports that may be required by certain communities. I would say the disability community often has higher expenses. Their cost of living is much higher than other folks often. So we can't get rid of those other programs. That's certainly not the intention. It's about improving our social safety net, improving current income guarantees to make sure that they're livable. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary at the Government House Leader.
So thank you, Madam Speaker, and appreciated the comments from the member from Winnipeg Centre. You know, at the end of the day, I think that we need to take a broader look in terms of how it is, as a society, that we're there to support and the types of support programs that are put into place. You know, Canada's social safety net is something that has evolved. Where we have jurisdictional responsibilities in different areas. And some governments have been more successful than other governments in terms of trying to eliminate poverty, in particular with focus on children. And I'd like to give some attention to that, Madam Speaker. But I want to emphasize, every year the national government hands over in the forms of a social transfer. And today, you know, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, somewhere in the neighborhood of over $15 billion a year. And that is to go to provinces to provide all forms of social support, Madam Speaker. And I can tell you, and that's the reason why I raised the issue, and the fact that, you know, when I was first elected, it was in 1988. Through the years, there's always been a great deal of discussion. How do we ensure that the people that need the support get the type of support that is necessary? And what if you had this one income and you guarantee it for everyone? I don't know if Canada's ready, and I know the member would be upset with that statement. I don't know, and I'm not convinced, that Canada is in a position in which we can do what it is that the legislation is actually asking for. I do believe that we need to take a look in terms of what it is and how a government is able to lower the poverty rate and target funding, Madam Speaker. I have yet to be convinced, and I am open to it, Madam Speaker, but I have yet to be convinced on the issue. And when I look in terms of what it is, for example, that we have been able to accomplish through targeted actions, it is very significant. You know, I've talked about, for example, the Canada Child Benefit Program and how that program lifted thousands of children in Winnipeg North out of poverty, Madam Speaker. I can talk about the Guaranteed Income Supplement, something in which the member herself made reference to. And again, how hundreds of seniors, the poorest seniors in the country, being lifted out of poverty as a direct result, Madam Speaker. There are ways in which the governments, both at the provincial level and the national level, can target in order to support people, Madam Speaker. And when I think in terms of the overall, poverty rate, when we came into government, the poverty rate was just under 15%. Just under 15%. 14.5, 0.6, or whatever it was there, Madam Speaker. Today, it's actually in around that 10%. And I suspect it is because of the targeted actions that we have taken as a government. And those are direct dollars. It doesn't take away from other types of investments that the government makes. So, for example, I was very proud of the fact when we came up with a $200 billion commitment towards health care. That commitment is going to ensure that people, no matter what their income levels are going to be provided quality health care services into the future, Madam Speaker. $200 billion over 10 years. You know, in the recent budgets, we've seen an expansion. We've seen, for example, the dental program. And when that's completely rolled out, Madam Speaker, Canada's population, 40 million people, we're talking over 9 million people that are going to have access to that dental program, Madam Speaker. In this budget alone, I believe it is the single largest expenditure, and I could stand to be corrected on this, but I believe the single largest expenditure is towards the disability program that we're putting out. And, you know, we look at it as a very important first step. And it is going to have a very positive impact in our communities, Madam Speaker. You know, some will say, well, why is it only $200? Well, before this amount, it didn't exist, Madam Speaker. When you talk about hundreds of thousands of applicants and use the multiplying factor, this is a very good start. Madam Speaker, we have other programs that we've brought in through this through the budget. The Pharmacare program. That is a program that's going to be providing life-saving medications for some individuals in Canada. Think in terms of the numbers, and I don't know the actual numbers, but you're going to the hundreds of thousands of people that are affected by diabetes. And now we have a national government that's going to be there in a very real and tangible way, Madam Speaker. These programs that are targeted specifically make a difference in our communities. Until at least I feel comfortable in knowing that what is being suggested through this legislation is not going to take away from. And when I say take away from, we're also talking about the financial commitments, Madam Speaker, from the enhancement of programs that I know is having a positive impact. You know, we actually increased for OAS 75 and above by 10%, and we were being criticized. Criticized from members because we made a commitment to do just that. Think about when you're hitting 75 and some of your retirement money is starting to diminish and your medical needs increase along with that sense of independence as a senior, and now you have a government that says, well, look, we're going to find the resources to ensure that you're going to get that substantial increase by 10%, Madam Speaker. That in itself helps a great number of seniors. So the government is able to look at ways in which it can actually make a difference. The child care program, billions of dollars that cost. And who here outside of the Conservative Party would say that that was a bad program? We all got behind it and supported $10 a day daycare. That is going to help, Madam Speaker, in every region of our country. When you think of programs, you know, I think of some of the ones that we don't necessarily get to talk about that often. You know, the CPP program. There are approximately 6 million people that have actually retired that look at CPP. CPP is something in which we worked with the provinces in order to ensure that they would get increases for the time in which people are retiring, Madam Speaker. And I maybe look at ending it on that because the way in which I started it was by saying I am familiar with what took place in the province of Manitoba. Maybe not in great detail, Madam Speaker, but I was around during the discussions that followed inside the Manitoba legislature for almost 20 years. And I didn't see, whether it was progressive conservative governments or NDP governments, there were no liberal provincial governments, Madam Speaker. We tried. But the bottom line is, I didn't see any advancement of it. The province of Manitoba, which is a fairly progressive province, saying, hey, look, we want the country to be moving in this direction. I suspect because they saw the value of having targeted ways in which we can bring people out of poverty. And this government has demonstrated that through many of the budgetary measures that we've taken virtually since 2015. And as a direct result, the poverty rate has dramatically gone down, Madam Speaker. And I think that this is a viable and a healthy way in moving forward. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Peterborough, Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to, before I get into the heart of my speeches, address a couple of comments, like I said, from the member from Winnipeg Centre, who I greatly respect. I just want to make it clear that the Conservatives are very open to working with the NDP and any other party that wants to go after tax loopholes, tax evaders. I know I've heard the member from Burnaby Westminster, if I've got the name rightly, talk a lot about the Panama Papers. Well, I asked just yesterday at Finance Committee, I asked CRA officials how many convictions, how many dollars have been collected from the Panama Papers, and I believe the answer is still zero. Right. And so I'm very happy to work with the NDP to close those loopholes, to go after the ultra-rich tax avoiders. And I want to thank, too, the member for putting forward this private member's bill, not only for the substance that it is, but it tells those who are struggling right now that the NDP care about the most vulnerable. And quite frankly, and from my heart, we heard from the member across the aisle that there seems to be an absence of recognition of the struggles that Canadians are going through right now. So thank you to the NDP for acknowledging that. But I want to talk. I want to talk about the affordability crisis. I know my NDP friends probably won't be as happy about these remarks, but I do, because I think it is the important context that surrounds all of where we are today. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about productivity and where we are as an economy, because ultimately it is the economy that will drive the wealth of the nation. If we have a strong economy, a productive economy, we will be wealthier as a nation. And we can certainly have arguments about how we divide that pie, and certainly the NDP have contributed greatly since their existence over and had meaningful discussions about how we split that pie. But I think it has to be said and stated unequivocally that growing that pie is a good thing. And quite frankly, we haven't seen that pie growing. Over the last decade, we've seen almost zero GDP per capita growth. And what that means is that we are facing a lost decade here in Canada. Our GDP per capita has grown by, the actual number is 4.73%. Contrast to the United States, which is nearly 50%. Their economy is growing 10 times as fast as ours over the last 10 years. Strong productivity will lead to higher wages. And like I said, we can certainly have discussions with the NDP about making sure that we have framework in place, such as competition that I know the NDP have been outspoken on and that we agree upon, and other framework to make sure that pie is divided equally. But we also have to talk about increasing that pie, because if that pie shrinks, the reality is, and this is not me saying, this is expert, this is economists, it will be the most vulnerable who suffer the most. And just going on that, just talking a little bit about the recently Carolyn Rogers, who's deputy governor of the Bank of Canada, talked about in her now famous speech, the break glass on productivity speech, about the impact and corrosive impact of a lack of productivity. One, it hurts inflation, because an economy that can produce more goods and services simply by virtue of that reduces the cost of everything. You can think of this as the basic rules of supply and demand. If in fact an economy produces more goods, the cost of those goods go down, the effect of inflation is decreased. She went on to say that the level of productivity in Canada's business sector is more or less unchanged from 7 years ago, as I talked about. Further, back in 1984, the Canadian economy was producing 88% of the value generated by the U.S. economy per hour. That's not great. But by 2022, Canadian productivity had fallen to just 71% of the United States. Over that same period of time, Canada has also fallen behind our G7 peers, with only Italy seeing a larger decline in productivity relative to the United States. Canada's productivity has fallen for the past 13 quarters. That's incredible. For the past 13 quarters, our productivity. And productivity is a fancy jargon economist word, but really all it means is our ability to make goods and deliver services. Are we making goods more efficiently, more effective? And certainly, imagine those last 13 years. We've seen tremendous innovation, the rise of digitalization, even now the beginnings of artificial intelligence, and yet our productivity in Canada has not increased over the last 13 years. A study published by the Fraser Institute found that from 2014, business investment per worker declined by 20%. And that's it. So that's a bit of the story too, is the fact that we are not attracting, maintaining investment here in Canada. And part of that, and I know what my NDP friends, because I had the pleasure of, I guess I can say his name now, he's not here, Daniel Blakey, and Mr. Blakey would go on and talk about the fact that the lack of competition was driving the lack of corporate spending. And I don't disagree entirely with that thesis. In fact, I think that's an area where the NDP and the Conservatives can actually work together. But what we can't do is we can't bring uncertainty into the markets. We can't overly restrict or unduly regulate businesses as well, because if we shrink their resources, we'll shrink the ability that they have to invest in our workers. Because Canadian workers are the best in the world, and they work as hard, if not harder, than anyone else in the world. The reason why their productivity is not increasing is because businesses are not investing in their equipment and their machinery. We are almost literally, you can imagine productivity in Canada being, we've got workers with shovels, the Americans have workers with backhoes. And so as hard as our workers work, they'll never be able to compete until we make the proper investments going forward. Over the past 5 years, productivity in the business sector has fallen 0.3%, while it has grown by 1.7% here in the U.S. So that's our problem. Longer term, the OECD projects Canada to rank dead last amongst the OECD members in real GDP growth out to 2060. Canada's 10-year average in GDP per capita is at its lowest level since the Great Depression. Cumulative growth has been about 2% in Canada versus 12% in the United States. A lack of productivity has real-life consequences. Unfortunately, we hear over and all it's the same solutions put, and I'm not talking about the private members bill, but across the aisle we hear the same solutions over and over again. It's more taxing, it's more spending, it's more taxing, it's more spending. Every time I hear this rhetoric, I always have in my head the great line from Winston Churchill that says, "I contend for a nation to try and tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket trying to lift himself up by the handle." These Liberals seem hell-bent on taxing prosperity, taxing productivity, taxing investment, and making anyone who wants to dream of succeeding in this country feel like they want something bad. But we need prosperity, and we need achievers, and we need success. Certainly, as I started out my speech, we need to make sure that all Canadians pay their fair share, and Conservatives have been clear and unequivocal on that point. But we also need to recognize those exceptional individuals who start from nothing, pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, make a success of it, create jobs, create wealth, and create prosperity, not just for themselves, but for our communities. So, in conclusion, Madam Speaker, once again, I'd like to thank this member for recognizing the terrible challenges that many Canadians are facing across this great country. What we really need in Canada is to bring back prosperity to this land through greater investments by our businesses, through an entrepreneurial spirit, through renewal, through rewarding success, and looking forward with optimism and to future prosperity. Thank you very much.
Resuming debate. The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is a pleasure to speak to this bill, and I would like to salute my colleague from the NDP for sparking a debate on guaranteed livable basic income. If I look at the preamble of the bill, well, I must also say that we need to recognize that the social question raised in our society is, it's to guarantee to any individual a livable basic income. In Quebec, there are studies that look at not even a minimum income, but a viable income, which is one that would, and that's supported by the IRSS, which is a research institute in Quebec. But it's an interesting concept because it takes into account all the regions. It's not just a basic income, but there's also the idea of a viable income. And we addressed that issue when we studied Bill C-223 on support for seniors. But all that to say, it's not just about prosperity. I don't think it will achieve true equality or equity. I think there would need to be robust social measures to ensure revenue equality in our society. I would like to also say, and I think a number of people know this, regardless of the concept that the title that we use, basic income, universal income, it's not a debate just on the left. The right has used it as well. Giving a basic income to everyone, but getting rid of the social safety net. That's another division. In Quebec, these debates arise regularly since the 1960s, where the union leaders promoted it. But in contexts like we saw recently, like the pandemic, in which there were $9 million jobs lost overnight, and it really highlighted the fragility of the social safety net at the time, which is employment insurance, which no longer plays that role. And we saw just how many people got caught by the social safety net at that time. These are debates that are ongoing, both in Quebec and elsewhere, in Canada, and internationally as well. In Quebec, when I said since the 1960s, the debate has been going on since the 1960s. The sheets are making a lot of noise for the interpreters, so if we could minimize that noise, please. It's quite loud. I will set aside my sheets, and I just wanted to let you know because it's surprisingly loud. Well, you did. That's very important. We need to protect our interpreters as well. Work is so essential in this house. But the hitch in what was raised by our colleague is that social safety nets are built and social programs are built in such a way that they don't fall under Ottawa. They're under provincial jurisdiction. That's one of the basic principles of this. It can help other social programs and ensure that that vulnerable people don't slip through the social safety net. What social programs would this basic income replace? We have a lot of strong social programs in Quebec. And I think that we're not debating this issue at the right place right now. As an example, we have a social safety net program other than employment insurance, which falls under the federal government because Quebec constitutionally agreed to get rid of it, and I think it was an error, but I think it should repatriate it, but that was done under the Constitution. So most of the programs are provincial in nature. For example, the child benefit, the disability benefit, and others. And recently in Quebec, we established in 2023, in addition to the Social Solidarity Program, a basic income program that seeks to help people who don't have a sufficient revenue, but it has become an important social safety net program. There is universal childcare in Quebec. It's a program that's part of the social safety net that is available to everyone. And for families or parents that pay into the Social Solidarity Fund, there is no contribution. So we want to ensure that there is this social safety net for solidarity. There need to be major social programs. And in Quebec, I think that we have demonstrated that social programs underpin this, particularly for people who are the most vulnerable, who need assistance. So all that to say that these social programs are the responsibility of Quebec, and that is constitutional. So including a guaranteed livable basic income program nationally in Canada would be like saying that we would transfer Quebec social programs to Canada. And that's a no for us. That would be unconstitutional. And I don't think it would be a good idea, and I'll explain myself. In the social safety programs in Canada, if we look at the EI system, it is no longer a social safety net. It has become an insurance program where 6 out of 10 workers who pay in don't have access to funds, where the self-employed don't, or gig workers, namely a lot of young people and women, don't have access to it. And when it was established, it was a social safety net. When the worst happened to us, that is losing one's job. So I think that we need to strengthen this social safety net. We talked about the guaranteed income supplement. Well, the GIS is a social pension. It's the old age security, because the federal government, for the old age supplement, doesn't rank very well compared to other OECD countries in supporting seniors. And to compensate for that low income, they have the guaranteed income supplement. Ideally, they shouldn't need a guaranteed income supplement. When someone reaches the age of 65, their old age security should be universal and should be strengthened and increased from the age of 65. But these aren't choices that the government is making. And furthermore, because these aren't federal jurisdictions, you just have to look at other social safety nets like health or education, which also fall under the jurisdiction of Quebec. And in health, federally, in the federal spending power, you know that the agreement that was signed at the time when Canada and Saskatchewan and all of the provinces and Quebec, they equipped ourselves with health acts, which would guarantee medical, universal, free medical care. The agreement at the time was that the federal government would fund 50% of health care. And we're far from that now. Over time, it has eroded to barely 25% that the federal government is funding. Will we trust the federal government to administer our social safety network programs in Quebec? The answer is no, because there are many examples. We see this with the disability benefits. We saw that in the budget, the objective set will not be met.
Your time is up. In fact, I gave you a little extra. Sorry. Resuming debate.
The honourable member for Hamilton Centre.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, there are few opportunities to rise in the House that give me the type of honor for which I've been bestowed to speak alongside my incredible candidate, my incredible colleague and seatmate from Winnipeg Centre on this particular issue. There are few topics that I could speak to that connect more with the material conditions for people in Hamilton Centre. I can tell you, Madam Speaker, that New Democrats come to our politics honestly. We come to it by viewing and watching and observing and many times experiencing the struggles, the poverty, the abject conditions that people are faced into, the legislative poverty. Watching people suffer in my city has radicalized me over the years, Madam Speaker, because there's this notion that for some reason it's always been done this way, there's no alternative, it always has to be this way, that we have to be in this zero-sum economy of winners and losers, and that the concentration of wealth and prosperity in this country always has to be distributed to the top. And when we look at what's before us, this bill for a guaranteed basic livable income, for a time we have a moment here, and we heard it from even the Conservative members who spoke on this bill, admit that there is an opportunity to put this bill to second reading, to begin to have a discussion about how we can lift people truly out of poverty, to raise the material conditions for people. And this is not a new topic. I'll share with you in Hamilton, much like the material conditions for people in Winnipeg Centre, the people in my city continue to struggle. That often we are the canaries in the coal mine, that when city centres like Toronto catch a cold, it's us who suffer the most. And I'll share with you, going back to 2009, you know, we first started the social assistance review, and I was in rooms with people like Tom Cooper and the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction, led by people with lived experience like the Campaign for Adequate Welfare and Disability, people like Elizabeth McGuire, Margie and Dan Gould, folks who were legislated to live in poverty. And when we talk about that, let's put things into perspective here for a moment. Forget about the ultra-wealthy. We can't barely even conceive in this country what $1 billion is. But there's something that people who are watching tonight can understand. And it's clear that currently in this province, Ontario Works, is $733 a month. $733 a month to live in this economy.
Shameful.
When we talk about the cost of living, what we're talking about is the crisis of capitalism, runaway profits, the inability for people to meet their basic needs. We're talking about the crumbling of the mythology of a liberal economy where people should be able to work hard, go to school, get a good job, take care of their family. That's no more, Madam Speaker. And then, quite rightly, my compassionate colleague refocused us with the understanding that people's worth and value ought not be tied to their employment and their productivity and our GDP, that humans have an inherent worth regardless of how they are utilized within a capitalist economy. And I'll share with you that people who are living right now sentenced to live in poverty in ODSP, it's like $1,300 a month. How can anybody, anywhere, with a straight face, say that's enough for people to survive, and yet we have this liberal government who has the audacity to suggest that an additional $200 a month will cover it? Now, there's a lot of people who think that this is the only way that things can be done, that there is no alternative. The sister brought up the example of Dauphin, but right in Hamilton, in fact, not too long ago, there was a government, in fact, a liberal government, Madam Speaker. A liberal government provincially put in a basic income. Now, not to be confused with the guaranteed livable income, the basic income project was, in fact, legislated poverty because it still sentenced people to live below the low-income cutoff. Now, I find it abhorrent that the Liberal member from the other side, from Winnipeg, stood up and completely dismissed this when even 80% of their own membership in their last policy convention stood for this, and Liberals continue to pay lip service to lifting people out of poverty while standing up and having the audacity to dismiss even a real discussion about this at second reading. And to that member, I say shame. Now, when the Hamilton Basic Income Pilot Project was brought up, I want people to take a moment. Let's humanize the issue. There was some incredible work done by Jessie Golem, who put together the humans of basic income. And the people that she profiled, like my friend Tim Button, my dearly, dearly missed comrade Michael Hampson, a disability justice advocate who said on this project, this pilot project in Hamilton, that granted people a meager $17,000 a year, still well below the low-income cutoff. But this is what he had to say by that little lift-up. He said that it changed his life. It gave me back my dignity and my faith in community. He said that the ODSP chained him in poverty, causing high stress, poor nutritional opportunities. He said that basic income gave him healing for the recipients, Madam Speaker. Healing. Now, this was a man that sorely we lost in COVID, but today I rise to honor him and to lift up his voices and to lift up all the voices of the Hamiltonians who, for a brief moment, were given a little bit of life and dignity by having the support. People could then pursue the education options they wanted. People had the opportunity to transition into jobs and, yes, indeed, flee gender-based violence. That's what we're talking about in this moment, Madam Speaker. That's why this bill is so important. And for anybody who wouldn't have the courage to at least allow this to go to second reading and have the discussion, I want them to think about those humans of basic income. I want them to think about and look at the encampments that they have in their community. That when we talk about the runaway crisis of capitalism and the way that the profiteering is happening and the corporate concentration of wealth, there is prosperity in this country, Madam Speaker. Right now, it's not a supply issue with housing. We have condos dotting the skies, cranes going up every day, year after year, record building permits, while we also have record numbers of people sentenced to live in tents in this country. In this country, New Democrats believe that everybody has the right to dignity. Everybody has the right to safety, to housing, to food, to the necessities of life, to education, to opportunity. and the audacity of a liberalism that says the middle class and those working hard to join them, as though what they lie about is that the most hardworking people in this country, Madam Speaker, the most hardworking people in this country are the ones sentenced to live in low income, in subsistence, and in deep poverty, and that's what we're here to change today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member will have 2 minutes the next time that this matter is 2 minutes. The honourable member will have the next time this matter comes before the House. A point of order. I'm going
to go ahead and just beat my Liberal colleague to the punch. I withdraw the term lie. Thank you.
The honourable member will have 2 minutes the next time this matter is before the House. The time provided